Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I give my thoughts and notes and whatnot on DMing Out of the Abyss for my party of intrepid players at my friendly local game store. And of course, Out of the Abyss, if you don't know by now, is the 5th edition Underdark adventure. So I always try to say at the beginning, if you're new to this video series, this is not an actual play. This is not a blow-by-blow of every little thing that happens. Instead, what it is, I try to give an overview of how the adventure runs, and then how I run it, and also give, kind of thoughts and tips on DMing and GMing in general, and maybe rules clarifications and that sort of thing. And also try to, kind of have some fun with it while we go. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you. So I'm going to put on my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback, and we're going to jump right into viewer feedback and then see what we can see with the actual adventure. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, it's not really part of viewer feedback, but it's something that I saw recently in the Out of the Abyss DMs Facebook group. Now, if you're a player playing Out of the Abyss, don't go join this Facebook group, because it's people talking about how to run it and different things that are going to happen. But if you're a DM who's running Out of the Abyss, or plan to, or if you're a player who's already finished Out of the Abyss, go check out this Facebook group, because they talk about running Out of the Abyss. But this guy, Dustin Fletcher, posted a video about 2 days ago, something like that. And he came up with this really cool custom mini to represent the maze engine. So rather than trying to describe it, let me show you the video. So that's pretty cool. Now, it's not exactly how the book describes it. It's supposed to be down in between a crevice, but man, that is cool. So, and DMs, of course, have the latitude to, fiddle around with how things are presented. But man, I definitely don't do anything like that with my miniatures. Closest thing I can think of is Dwarven Forge, like Stefan Pokorny and those guys over there. They can come up with some pretty elaborate tabletop stuff. And of course, if you watch like Acquisitions Incorporated, the setups that Chris Perkins, there's a guy that does them for Chris Perkins. I can't remember who it is exactly, but they come up with some really cool stuff to play on for miniatures. But I've never seen anything quite like what Dustin did with all the the lights and all that. So anyway, again, well done, Dustin. And if you're a DM out there and you have photos or videos of elaborate stuff you've done for Out of the Abyss, send them to me and I'll show them in a video. So anyway, all right, moving right along to the actual viewer feedback. Let's see here. I think we had 2 or 3 comments on the last video. Yeah, so first of all, Sonic Halo said, well, that's one way to solve one of the Demon Lord problems. And he's talking about one of the random effects of the Maze Engine, which we, last session had finished with the Maze Engine encounter, was that all extraplanar beings within, I think, 100 miles were banished back to their home plane. And, I had determined, the players still don't know, I think they kind of guessed, but I had determined that Baphomet, who I had said was on the way, had been summoned by Slaughtertusk, got caught in that. So Baphomet, bye-bye. Probably some other demons and stuff that were around went bye-bye. And then the little Modron, their little Modron that they had rescued from the Beholder went bye-bye. And, its fate as a rogue Modron back on its home plane of Myconids, I think, is probably not going to be good. But who knows? You never know. Anyway, so he says, I can just imagine Baphomet marching along and then pop! Back, let me see if I can... Back to the endless maze in the abyss. He must be so mad. Oh well, I guess he could start the resistance against Loth early. Remember, all of this is ultimately a plan by Loth to get all the Demon Lords out of the abyss so she can take over the abyss with all her little hatchlings. One less challenger for the final battle royale. or Royal. Also, that half-orc coming back as second level character is way out of their league at this point in the adventure. Yep. He's talking to the fact that, like, we ended on, you know, one of the effects of the Maze Engine was that a dead player character, an NPC or NPC, can just suddenly be back to life. And I, out of all the possibilities, I thought the one that would be the craziest would be to be Mara, that the famous paladin character that so many people have commented on, that not only killed the were-rats and earned Eldith's ire, but also charged the adult red dragon at second level and was quickly dispatched, and almost completely made a complete shambles out of the situation with the red dragon and that whole subplot. Was it Thimberchod? I think was the name of that dragon in Gracklestug. Anyway, so yeah, I did that on purpose just for craziness. One, because I've gotten so many comments on that character, not only from video comments, but also in our group. I mean, that's, you know, that is a famous / infamous character in our group. So it just seemed too much fun to bring her back. And, you know, I don't know. And plus the level difference. Now, what I did in between sessions, in between that session and our next one, you know, we used our Facebook group to do some, you know, kind of out of game narrative or in-game stuff, but, you know, not at the table, but, you know, kind of working stuff out on Facebook. Now, we don't use Facebook a lot for game, like in-game stuff. We'll use it for, you know, coordination or asking simple questions or stuff like that. But actual, like, moving the game forward, we don't use it a lot. However, there was a little bit of a break in between two sessions. So to keep things moving forward, we used Facebook that way. And, you know, one of the things we established was that, you know, Mara, the second level half-orc paladin with high charisma but low intelligence and low wisdom, was not going to be a player character at this point, not in this campaign. Now, you know, it's conceivable if she survives as an NPC through Out of the Abyss, for however she ends up being utilized, that, you know, she could possibly go, you know, on another adventure, a lower level adventure or whatever, but she's not suddenly going to be a player character at this point in Out of the Abyss. You know, I mean, it would just be dumb because she's not going to survive. So what they ended up doing with Mara was deciding to make her part of the expedition, because they can't really take the resources to take her anywhere right now, and they could only teleport back to Vizeron's cavern, and they also did not want to leave Mara, you know, in the outpost at Vizeron's cavern, because you've got this, you know, I will kill everything that's evil paladin, low intelligence, low wisdom, hanging around a drow archmage. You know, that's just not gonna go well, probably. So, or at least having a chance to run into the drow archmage. So they decided to take Mara with them, and they asked their honor guard, the Order of the Gauntlet, to kind of watch over her and try to keep her, you know, in line. Although she thinks that, you know, they need her, that the honor guard needs her, right? Her influence and her nobility, noble spirit, and all this stuff. So, yeah, and the honor guard's like, oh, this, you know, they're like, oh, you know, at the end of every day, the stuff they're having to deal with Mara. So that it became kind of funny. Anyway, so that's what we did with that second level character. And I've literally added her to the NPC sheet for the honor guard, or not the honor guard, but the expedition. I wrote her in as part of the Order of the Gauntlet, you know, contingent. So, and, you know, it's possible she could die either, you know, directly in combat or as part of that random stuff that happens to expedition members. We had, in, you know, this video here will cover 2 sessions, and we had an NPC die again. I'll get into that here in a little bit. One of the expedition members. So, anyway, so yeah, Sonic, Halo, second level characters way out of their league at this point in the adventure. So we'll see what happens. Okay. Vasily said the maze engine was a truly epic encounter. My players loved it. And I said, yep, it's weird because it's so crazy, but it's also not essential to the campaign at all. So you don't have to do the maze engine if you don't feel like messing with it. I mean, it literally is, well, not literally, but as close to being literally without actually being literally, like kind of giving them a deck of many things to play with. Really cool things can happen, or really awful things can happen. Campaign derailing things can happen. So they could lose all their magic weapons. Worse things could happen. I mean, it's a dead character can come back to life. And who's to say that that's a good thing? There's a lot of more effects. If you go study the Maze Engine encounter, but it's interesting to me that they put such a very cool, incredible encounter, but didn't make it necessary to the campaign. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to mess with the Maze Engine if you don't want to. Or I suppose you could find a way to make it part of they have to, maybe something they need is one of the ingredients just so happens to be in the cavern of the Maze Engine, like maybe the Tamask mushrooms that grow in a demon's footprint. Who knows? Okay. And then we had one final comment from Gray Ciroli. Hope I said that right. Said, wow, took a long time to catch up. Well worth it. I'm thinking of running Dragon Heist in the new year, and I like the amount you add your own content to the adventure. Anyway, great video series for any DM, as there isn't anything else as close to the experience of running a game. Keep them up. Thanks, man. That's, again, as I've said before, that's my goal, is to find a format that is helpful in helping other people run the campaign. And then, maybe give DMing tips in general or rules clarifications. Because if you watch an actual play or listen to an actual play, you might have to listen to like 3 or 4 hours of stuff for one encounter. And you're really wanting to know like just one or two things. And on the flip side, I don't want to give such a minor overview that it's not helpful. So I try to find that kind of middle ground. And I want to say again, I've promoted this a lot before, and I don't even know the people that run Elven Tower, but their Out of the Abyss guide is a fantastic resource. I use it all the time, so I also recommend it. And then go check out that Facebook group on Out of the Abyss DM's Facebook group. That's also a good resource. So and then Gracie Rowley also said, hey, also traveling back in time is not so bad. With the Wand of Vengeancy teleportation, they could teleport to the Tower of Vengeance and skip most of the first half of the adventure. You know what? I hadn't even thought of that. But yeah, that's true. If you, with my personal campaign, they could potentially use that and then just go straight from Velkenvelve to the Tower of Vengeance, and hopefully have enough time to explain to Vizeron what's going on before he annihilates them, or at least a few of them. You could also, like, the DM part of me is starting to go, oh no, wait a minute, because there's when was the Wand of Vengeancy Underdark teleportation created? Was it even created at that point? Would there be two of them in existence at that very moment with the same magic? And with the delicate nature of teleportation and the Fair's Rest inside the Underdark, could that cause a problem? I probably wouldn't do that, but the DM part of me is like, well, maybe I could have some fun. It's like crossing the stream with two duplicated, two of the exact same magic item. And remember, the Wand of Vengeancy, of limited, Vengeancy Underdark teleportation is just a magic item I came up with as a plot device to help the characters move around, but in a limited fashion to prevent abuse. And it's not technically a wand with charges and all that. It kind of looks like a rod or a wand, but you have to cast a ritual and all that. And you can only go back to where you can only go from the Tower of Vengeance to where you last teleported to the Tower of Vengeance from. Or you can, wherever you're at, if you're outside of the Tower of Vengeance, you can teleport back from wherever, basically, unless there's some, crazy reason why you can't. Like when they were in the Gallery of Angels, I decided that it wouldn't work in there due to all the divine stuff going on. So you can teleport back to the Tower of Vengeance. And then if you're in the Tower of Vengeance, you can only teleport to where the last place you teleported back from. So anyway, okay. But yeah, but ultimately, when it comes to that one result of the Maze Engine that sends you back in time, and all of the characters at their current level, with all their current memories and experience and equipment and everything, pop into Vulcan Velve at the very beginning of the campaign again, even in an accelerated fashion, I just don't want to do that. I'm ready to move on. But again, other DMs, seasoned to taste. All right, and one of the I'm going to do a rules clarification, and then we'll move into the recap. And normally I leave my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback on during the rules clarifications time. So these are now the +3 spectacles of rules, notes, and clarification. So one of the things that happened in the most recent session is that a player failed a madness saving throw. Remember that Out of the Abyss has its own additional madness mechanic. And as part of that, they developed a long-term madness because they had already previously had one level of madness before. So, you keep track of that. And so they had a, short-term madness, had a little hash mark showing them that they had that. And then they developed another madness, and now they're getting a long-term madness. And the result that I rolled in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the madness stuff is on 258 through 260, under long-term madness was the character regards something, usually the source of madness, with intense revulsion, as if affected by the antipathy effect of the antipathy-sympathy spell, which I was not overly familiar with, that spell. But the point is that spell is an 8th level. The spell itself is an 8th level spell, and it creates, the antipathy part of it creates this, where it's like you're almost afraid. You are afraid. You're like, I don't want to be anywhere near that. I can't stand being anywhere near that. I want to get away from it. And there's some other stuff. I'm not going to go into the full spell, but the point is, my player, whose character fell under the effect of that madness right at the end of the last session, called me and said, have you researched what we're going to do about that madness? And I said, well, I don't know what you mean. I mean, it's madness. It'll last a certain amount of time, and da-da-da. And he's like, well, how do we get rid of it, and this and that? And I was like, well, I can't remember, but I know that, lesser restoration will help with some stuff, greater restoration with the other, there's other things. And the player said, well, but it's like an 8th level spell. And I went, no, it's a madness effect that is like the antipathy spell. So the player was actually kind of rooting for various reasons for it to be like an 8th level spell effect, and he wanted it to be harder to get rid of than just a regular madness. And I said, well, no, even though, the spell that the madness effect is like is an 8th level spell, and this and that and the other, it's just the effect, not the cause. So the cause is madness, which, short, long, and indefinite madnesses all have established ways to cure them. And a short and long-term madness can both be cured with a lesser restoration. Indefinite madness needs greater restoration, and then there's other ways to cure madness that we've talked about before. So I just wanted to point that out, that even like if a madness effect or something says it's similar to the effect, or the effect you get is like the effect of a spell, that doesn't mean that it's the same as being under a magical spell. It means that you're in this case, it's madness that's causing the effect, which has a whole different mechanic for dealing with it, as well as, going mad in the first place. And there was another thing that I kind of had to do on the fly, because it says that as part of the antipathy effect, you have to make a wisdom saving throw, I guess, if you're exposed to the source of the antipathy. And if you fail it, then, you act almost like you're under a fear effect. And I didn't know what to make the DC for the saving throw, because, it says, when such a creature can see the target or comes within 60 feet of it, talking about, whoever is under the effect of the antipathy, when they come within 60 feet or see the source of what they're revolted by, the creature must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or become frightened. The creature remains frightened while it can see the target is within 60 feet, or was within 60 feet. So, and it must use its movement to get to the nearest safe spot and that sort of thing. So, but the thing is, I don't know what to set the saving throw at. So, since it's a madness effect, then do I just automatically assume the saving throw fails and you're like, gotta go? Or what? So what I did, because if it's an 8th level spell. So if I said, if I calculated, what an average saving throw difficulty would be for somebody who could cast an 8th level spell, that's probably going to be a pretty high DC. So I just kind of on the fly said 15, and they failed. So, and I guess I could have just said, well, it's a madness, it's not a spell, so you don't get a saving throw, you're exposed to it, and you're cuckoo frightened. So I don't know. Anyway, but that's how I handled that. Like I said, I like to try to give you insight into kind of how I deal with things on the fly. And and remember, as long as you're consistent and everyone's having fun and you're fair, then there's really no wrong answer here. No wrong answer. As long consistent, fair, everybody's having fun. Okay, so let's get to what happened in the last couple of sessions. So they went back to Viseron's Tower of Vengeance, that cave area, after the Maze Engine stuff with Mara, who's like, whoa, and she recognizes a few of the characters from earlier in the venture. Some of them she doesn't. And then also the rogue, who we jokingly refer to as Lord Fancy Pants, because he's like a charming con man type rogue that passes himself off as a noble whenever possible, had been turned into a flying snake. So off they go, and also minus the Modron. So they go back to the cave, and basically Viseron is like, okay, we need to figure out what to do next. There's still 2 ingredients left to get. We need to get the spell book from, or the grimoire, Gronf Monray's grimoire from Menzo Baranzan, and we also need to get the mushrooms from the footprint of a certain type of demon. And he's like, let me meditate on what the next best course of action is, because the closer we get to completing this, the less margin there is for error. So he's like, let me think about what to do. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm actually, per Elven Tower's recommendation, which I agree with, I'm deviating from the chapter order of the book. The book, after the Labyrinth and the Maze Engine and all that stuff, sends you to Menzo Baranzan. And then after that, it sends you to the Fetid Wedding. And I thought Elven Tower made some pretty good reasons for swapping that, send them to the Fetid Wedding first and then Menzo Baranzan. Not the least of which being like they go to Menzo Baranzan and then they come back and then they go to the Fetid Wedding. And then if they follow what Viseron wants, then they go back to Menzo Baranzan to, place the artifact and or the thing he's creating, the relic or whatever that's going that you could do the ritual and all the demon lords will show up and he wants to destroy Menzoberranzan and all that. Now it may very well turn out that the players cop on to what's going on, that it doesn't have to be cast in Menzoberranzan, even though Vizeron says it does, and they do it somewhere else. And there's chances for them to find out the truth if you choose to, kind of go that way with it. But the main reason I didn't run Menzoberranzan after the Maze Engine was because the last few weeks have been kind of crazy personally for my family. And Menzoberranzan is another one of those chapters that has a lot of moving parts. It's not quite as bad as Gracklestug, but it's kind of getting there. And I just didn't have time to be as familiar with the material as I wanted to be to take my players in there. And the Fetid Wedding chapter is, there's still a few things going on, but let me close this. But it's much more manageable. So it's a very practical decision on my part. But I agree with a lot of what Elven Tower recommends, and especially with the way I'm doing teleporting. If you're using teleporting in this adventure, I do think it makes sense to send them to Menzoberranzan last. One, it's a big, exciting thing. Not that the Fetid Wedding isn't a big, exciting thing, but going to Menzoberranzan and all the craziness going on, and then you get the final, we got the grimoire. And then, the way my party can do it if they want, they can go back to Vizeron, and he can finish everything up, and then he can send them back to Menzoberranzan and say, okay, place it wherever and execute the ritual, and Bob's your uncle. Or they could go somewhere else. But if they're gonna do the ritual in Menzoberranzan, to me it just makes sense to finish everything with Menzoberranzan and then go into the final chapter, which is the final big demon lord battle thing, which is just going to be crazy. Even with, I think they're -1 demon lord Baphomet. They will be minus when everything is said and done with the Fetid Wedding. I mean, unless you, as a DM, intercede and change things around, Zuggtomy is toast. So, and then very possibly Juiblex will be toast. But there's still going to be a lot of demon lords charging around in that final battle. But anyway, just be aware that if you want to follow the book and go straight to Menzoberranzan, I'm not there yet. It'll probably be a couple of videos before we get there. So, and there, anyway, nothing wrong with that. Just giving you the heads up. So they're back in the cave and they spend a couple of days there as Vizeron meditates, or like a week or something. And as they're there, a few things become apparent. One, Eldith is not happy to see Mara. Eldith doesn't like Mara. I don't know if you remember way back, many videos ago, like towards more the beginning of the campaign, when Mara provoked the fight with the two Svirfneblum that were really were-rats and killed them. Eldith went unglued on Mara, and ever since then has not really liked Mara, and doesn't like the way Mara behaves, and thinks she's dumb and gets them in trouble, which is true, and saw what Mara did with the dragon. Eldith's like, so so she's like, really, good riddance. She's a danger to herself and others in the Underdark. And now here comes Mara, and she's like, ugh. So she's, she makes it pretty clear that she's not happy to see Mara. One, like, what is this? What trickery is this? Was this, what demon trickery is this? But even if she thinks Mara is the real deal, she doesn't trust Mara and doesn't want her around. So we played on that a little bit. Now Vizeron was very intrigued to hear what happened to the Maze Engine and spent some time studying Mara, and said, look, there's nothing unusual here. And this is not a doppelganger or anything like that. Best I could tell, this is who the person is supposed to be. I don't sense any weird magics or this or that or the other. It's whatever. So after that, Vizeron kind of dismisses Mara after he studies her and but he's very, very interested in learning about everything that happened at the Maze Engine and is pretty upset to learn, even though he acknowledges that it's out of the player's control. He's still like, you know, would love to get his hands on something like that. So it's probably better that he didn't, considering that he is a Drow Archmage and is not exactly a good guy. The player who got turned into a flying snake, and this is a player who's always very creative, same player that did Daggers, the blind rogue, for the first part of Out of the Abyss, and then also, had Grimy Peters, the dwarf that was always disgusting, who King Bruiner made take a bath when they went to Gontal Grim. Anyway, that player actually brought in the statistics for a flying snake, and said, I preparing to play as a flying snake. So, which I thought was great. Now I've shared with a player out of character, out of game. I said, look, we'll have fun with it, but it's not going to be permanent. I said, but we'll have some fun with it, and he's cool with it. So, and now if I had a player that just really was, desperately unhappy I may go like a session with it and then revert it for them. But what I'll probably do with the flying snake is have it just spontaneously revert at like kind of a really entertaining or dramatic time. Hopefully entertaining, but we'll see. But yeah, he actually came in and he had the whole stats and everything. And I said, okay. And because of that, for the rule of cool, I said that you can add all of the abilities of a first level rogue to this snake, because the player's a rogue. The player's character is a rogue, right? So we're having some fun with that. Now, Vizeron studied the flying snake, and he was like, look, because I'm familiar with who the flying snake was before, and just the nature of what's going on here, I believe I can revert the snake back to the person, but that person, the rogue, will owe me a debt, and so the players are having to decide on his behalf, because the snake can't really communicate or anything like that, and isn't quite intelligent enough to be able to engage in that kind of discussion. The players are like kind of thinking it back and forth, and out of character, the player said he'd rather not, but if the players had made that deal on on the snake's behalf, I would have totally gone with it, and that would have been kind of interesting for this rogue to now owe Vizeron, a Drow Archmage, a debt. So anyway, one of the things we did to have fun with this even more was I randomly decided by a die roll that this snake was going to take a liking, like an extra liking, to one of the player characters in the party. And it just so happened by the dice roll to be the Tiefling Monk, who is a cat type Tiefling and very colorful. And so we decided, after the roll established that was the person, we kind of came up with it was because that Tiefling character is very colorful, and the flying snakes, if you go look them up, are very colorful. They're almost like kind of tropical looking or something in it. So it kind of bonded, almost as if like, giving, creatures and natures and colors and all the role that plays in mating, that this snake has kind of gotten confused into thinking that it would like to mate with the Tiefling. Everybody's having fun with it. Let me be clear that if anybody, like any of the players involved, were like, no, that's not cool, I wouldn't run with that, but everybody's laughing and we're having fun with it. So, and there's also the tail, on the Tiefling, that's like a colorful snake kind of. So, just having a lot of fun with that. So, there's, times where a lot of times when the Tiefling wakes up, the snake is right there, and it's always wanting to kind of hang around with her and stuff like that. Okay, so I'll let that go a few sessions, and then, like I said, I'll when I get the sense that the player isn't enjoying the snake thing anymore, I'll revert it. So, but he seems to be cool with it right now. Now, what I was playing it like, well, the Viseron is going to decide where you go next, but I forced the situation with the Fetid wedding. It kicks off with a vision from Sovereign Basidia, which is one of the main Myconids from Neverlight Grove. And that kicks everything off, which I'll get to here in a moment. A couple other just kind of role play things we did as people asked about downtime activities. And the bard who has previously role played that they're learning different languages and stuff is now teaching a couple of the characters Undercommon. Because, I said that's fine, if you want to use your downtime to learn Undercommon. And then also the book, I brought the book back up again. Now, this is the book that there was a player in the group that character asked to borrow a book on magic from Viseron, which really offended Viseron, but he's like, all right. And he gave him one, but it's like reading the Necronomicon. It might teach you stuff, but you're probably going to go mad. So Viseron was, okay, fine, sure, here you go. Well, that player ended up, not being in the group anymore. And so this book thing is kind of hanging, and Viseron keeps going, where is my book? And, the players are like, oh, well, they finally established a couple of sessions ago that they have sent a message via the Sending Stones back to the guild to say, we need to get that book back. So, and then they told Viseron truthfully that, okay, we've sent a message, we're trying to get your book back. So, because eventually, this is my freaking book, and, it's a big deal. Remember that Viseron is an ally. He's not necessarily a friend, and he's definitely not a good guy. Now, these players have brought him a lot of stuff, like an entire beholder's body, not just the eye, of an entire Garistro's body. They later you'll find out they brought him most of a Behir. So he's like, he doesn't exactly like them, but he sees that they're very useful. So from a business relationship, for him, it's a good business relationship. Anyway, so what happens is, at the beginning of the Fetid wedding chapter, Sovereign Basidia contacts the players through a vision. And you can either have it while they're sleeping or while they're awake or any of that. But he basically tells them, hey, man, there's really bad stuff going on. There's this huge fungal creature called Araumycos. That's how I pronounce it anyway. I'm not sure if that's the exact way to say it. And Zuggtomy, who, if you remember, was getting ready for a wedding back in Neverlight Grove when she was in that big, huge mushroom tower. She was literally getting her fitted for her wedding dress. Wants to come bond with this huge fungal entity and become way more powerful because of how big and powerful it is. So this thing it's kind of hard to describe, but it's just this huge, like it's bigger than a lot of countries, but it's in the Underdark and it just takes over this huge area. If you look on the map of the Underdark, I think in chapter 2, it shows this huge area that it just says Araumycos. So Araumycos is both a creature, just this huge fungal entity, and an entire region in the Underdark. So, anyway. So, and he's like, Zuggtomy wants to basically, and it's kind of a twisted, kind of evil, corrupted use of the word, but wants to marry Araumycos and kind of bond with it and increase her power. So, and Sovereign Basidia is like, this is very terrible and awful if this happens. The whole threat of the demon lords, conceivably gets a lot worse if this happens, and then she will become more powerful than the other demon lords and all that. So from that perspective, it's bad for the Underdark in the surface world, but it's also very bad for Vizoran's plan, because the plan was let all the demon lords fight it out, and the ones that are left over and are weakened, take them out. Well, the whole balance of that's gonna get upset if Zuggtomy bonds with Araumycos. So what Basidia wants to do, he tells them to come to Araumycos, and he will create a rapport between the adventurers and Araumycos' vast sleeping mind, and have them wake Araumycos up, because Zuggtomy, through magic and spores and all this stuff, has been kind of lulling Araumycos to sleep in preparation for what's happening. So he says, please, quick, go to, make your way to Araumycos, come find me, I'll find you, and then, I'll help you do this. And by that, he's gonna, when he meets up with them, he's going to give them some spores and that sort of thing that, one, make them temporarily immune to Zuggtomy's influence, so they won't get turned into spore servants and all that. And then two, he will help them, like this, give them this rapport that will help them talk with Araumycos. So that's in a nutshell what's happening here. He also warns them that most of the Myconids out there and fungal creatures are falling under the influence of Zuggtomy, and to try to avoid them. And in fact, the Myconids are on the march. They're in this strangely, creepily festive march where they're singing and dancing and cavorting, and it's all these like fungal creatures and Myconids and awakened Zerkwood mushrooms and spore servants, which are various races of the humanoid races of the Underdark, which have been infected by the spores, and stuff have busted up through their heads. So they're basically like mushroom zombie kind of things, but they're not undead. So he says, stay away from them. Not the least reason being that you could fall under the influence of their spores and become spore servants yourself. But come find me. And then it also says, if Stool or Rumpadump have met the characters before and are still alive, they can join in on the rapport. Now, my players never ran into Rumpadump, but they did have a pretty good relationship with Stool, so Stool joined the conversation. So that was a fun little moment. Now, the characters did ask Basidia about, I forgot his name. Oogle, what's the sentient gelatinous cube? Can't believe I've forgotten his name. But yeah, Basidia's like, oh, we haven't seen him for a while. So I'm determining I'll have him show up again, but I don't know exactly when. But I will have him show up again. So the other thing that the players don't know is that the fungi of and this is on page, a lot of the stuff I'm telling you is on page 208 and 209, is that Juiblex, the Faceless Lord, has caught wind of its rival Zuggtomy's intentions and has mobilized an army of oozes, now making its way towards Araumycos. The Demon Lord wants to slow Zuggtomy's progress toward her goal. More importantly, though, Juiblex seeks the opportunity to appear at the ceremony, either to thwart Zuggtomy's intentions or to take advantage of Araumycos' vulnerability, or both. So, though Araumycos represents the perfect mate to Zuggtomy, Juiblex sees it as a living feast of tremendous proportions. So there's starting to be a lot of conflict between oozes and fungal type stuff, fungal creatures and Myconids. And that's one thing that, I kind of did foreshadow, kind of give a clue to the players through Basidia's vision, which, by the way, was established through, these rapport spores that they put out, and then just kind of the weird nature of the madness and the magic and the Underdark and the Fair's Arrest and all that. But there's a lot more spore activity in the Underdark because of what Zuggtomy's doing, and through that, Basidia was able to establish a rapport from way far away with the players. And if you'll remember, that's how Myconids communicate, is through these spores they put out, and they're called rapport spores, so it allows them to talk, telepathically through these spores. So, so the vision ends. They all wake up, and not too long later, Viseron comes out and says, I intercepted that vision, through various arcane spells and wards and whatnot that I have here at my tower. He goes, I know everything that's going on, and I definitely think that you should move with all haste to Araumycos. And he tells them what he knows of Araumycos, which is, huge creature. Everything that Basidia said seems to make sense. So he wants them to move with all haste towards Araumycos. He agrees with everything that Basidia said. It all makes sense to him. And the whole balance of his plan is now being threatened, if Zuggtomy gets that powerful. So he's like, go. And he goes, when you get back, we'll, do the final things in Menzoberranzan and etc. So off they went. Now I did the measurements of the map, and Araumycos is 10 hexes from Araj, which is where they're at. The Tower of Vengeance is in Araj. That's 240 miles. 240 miles at a normal pace is 40 days. Now that's as the crow flies, even though there's no crows in the Underdark. As the bat flies, I don't know. If the characters take a direct route, they will go through the Dark Lake. So, one of my players constantly states that his character is, doing as much cartography and mapping and all of that as he can. In fact, when he was in Graven Hollow, I think he got some of his research gives him advantage on a couple of map checks. He has like 2 or 3 times you can use advantage or something like that in certain situations. But he asked, what does my cartography tell me about how I understand how everything's laid out? And I said, well, you're pretty sure the direction you're going from here, if you go straight, you're going to hit the Dark Lake. And they're like, yeah, we don't want to mess with the Dark Lake. So they went around a little bit. Now, one of the other players who has the foldable boat, totally wanted to go to the Dark Lake, but they're like, no, we're gonna skip the Dark Lake. Now, one thing I did, and this is not in the book, there's a lot of random encounters in this chapter 16, which starts page 208. There's a lot of random encounters and etc. I agree with Elven Tower that if the characters at the levels the book expects them to be at this point, random encounters aren't going to be that challenging. My players are still fairly low level compared to what the book expects them to be, but there's a lot of them, and they've proven that they can handle most challenges. However, what I did, I don't know, I just wanted to. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I sicked a Behir or a Behir on them, which is that big, long reptile type thing. Storm giants created them to fight dragons, and they spit electricity, and they're pretty tough. So I had a Behir fight, and it. By the roll of the dice and this and that and the other, it ate one of the NPC members. It ate one of their spies. And when they defeated the Behir, because the Behir swallows, and then there's a mechanic for acid and this and that and the other, kind of like a purple worm. And, the cleric was like, well, can I revivify? And I said, oh, I've been in there for a little while. So it's still within a minute that the character died, because the combat only lasted, 5, 6, 7 rounds or something like that. I don't know. So that's, 30, 40 seconds, something like that, of combat time. So technically, yeah, Revivify, I think, is within a minute of somebody dying. But the problem is they've been in there with like acid on them and all of that. They were eaten. So I was like, I don't know if they're in a physical state where they can be revivified, because, it'll say that Revivify doesn't regrow limbs and, all that, if you're decapitated and all that, which is pretty gruesome. So what I did, I just said, well, I said, I'll give you a 75% chance that the spy, your NPC member, your expedition member is still in a state where you could revivify them. And they rolled an 87. So that's not a mechanic that's in the book. That's just how I do it sometimes. I just come up with a percentage and say roll. And I think that's a fair way to do it. You give them a chance, if it's within reason what they're asking, but let the dice decide. I'm a big fan of letting dice decide a lot of stuff in games. That's just me. Maybe that's the old school in me. I don't know. Okay. But the Behir attack was a lot of fun. I wanted it to be fun. And we had fun with it. And for I don't know why. I just wanted to sick a Behir on him. And it's just a big nasty. It's not quite a dragon, but it's kind of like a dragon fight. And one of the players got swallowed. And luckily, it died within a round or two of them being swallowed, so they were able to, get themselves out and get the other spy out. Ooh, look at the body and all that. So anyway, all right. So we did that. Again, that wasn't in the book. And the next session, we started right there. They have a dead Behir. So what did they do with the Behir? That's right. They took it back to Vizeron. They said, here's some more spell components. A couple of things, though. One, they wanted to keep the head for a trophy. So, yes, as they're clambering around, walking around in the Underdark, they're wanting to carry a big Behir head. Sure, why not? So they chop off the Behir head, and then they kind of coil up the body so that it'll fit within, that there is I've kept it kind of loose, but there is a limited diameter that this teleportation ritual will bring in. I've said it'll fit the whole expedition, but not much more than that. So they coiled up the Behir and took it back to Vizeron, and Vizeron was like glad to get it. He's like came out and he's like, is that a Behir? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, where's the head? And they're like, well, it exploded. And he's kind of looking at the head, which was chopped off with a sun sword, sun blade. And he's like, that doesn't look like it exploded, but they're like, oh. So he's like, okay, whatever. But he was glad to have it. So, they just keep bringing him stuff, sure. So anyway, so they go back, and then they're, as players will do, there's this huge discussion on what are we going to do with his head, right? Players will just obsess over this stuff. But they did bury the dead spy. They remembered to do that, which I thought was nice because, it was a follow-up session. There'd been a week in between, but they remembered to bury the spy. And they did cut off the Behir, or the head of the Behir. And there was like, what do we do with the head? What do we do with it? How do we carry it? They ended up dedicating one of their mounted lizard things to carrying the head. And they also, took a lot of the skin off of it and got the brains out of it and all of that stuff. So anyway, they want that. They really like trophies because they're in the guild that we've mentioned several times, and they like trophies for their guild hall. They've taken other trophies during this adventure. They also asked, as they got to Araumycos, the region of Araumycos, they asked, is there any of that exploding fungus? And there is a type of exotic fungus in the Underdark. It talks about it in chapter 2. There's all these different kind of funguses, and one of them is like, it's kind of exploding fungus. And they asked about that, and I just kind of said, well, Araumycos is so rich and diverse with all this kind of fungus that you find some. So let's talk about Araumycos a little bit. Says the domain of Araumycos is a bizarre fungal realm in the heart of the Underdark. Araumycos' tunnels and caverns are dimly lit by phosphorescent fungi. And then it says fungal life, this is on page 209 in a sidebar, it says fungal life fills the caverns and passageways in the region, with visitors literally walking upon and within Araumycos upon entering its domain. The floor is carpeted with thick mold and fungus, creating patches of difficult terrain throughout. Characters either have to climb or hack their way through the fungal growth. In other places, the fungus covering the floor is soft enough that the characters can sink into it with no warning. And it says use the quicksand rules in Chapter 5, Adventure Environments, the Dungeon Master's Guide for such areas. Creatures that fail to escape become food for Araumycos. Now, as I said, there's on page 210 and 211, there's a lot of different random encounters, including a death tyrant, which is basically an undead beholder. That's a pretty crazy random encounter, but you can do that if you want. There's some Myconid parades, there's Grix, a mold pit, Um, demons, oozes, two-headed trolls, which are basically the same as regular trolls, but they have two heads because of the weirdness of the Underdark. Because of Demogorgon's presence into the Underdark. So, and this is on page 211. It says, in the time it takes the characters to reach Araumycos' cavern, or caverns, after receiving Basidia's message, Zuggtomy and her fungal entourage arrive at the site of the ceremony near the center of those caverns. The entourage includes hundreds of Myconid adults and Myconid sprouts, accompanied by awakened zirkwoods, which are basically like awakened trees, but they're big zirkwood mushrooms, and bridesmaids of Zuggtomy. And both of the awakened zirkwoods and bridesmaids of Zuggtomy are from Appendix C in this book. And there's ambulatory fungi such as violet fungi and gas spores. Various spore servants fill out Zuggtomy's entourage. And it says, see the Myconids entry of the Monster Manual and Appendix C of this adventure. Now, when Basidia shows up, it says, as the characters approach the center of Araumycos' great cavern complex, Basidia meets them with a small detachment of loyal Myconids. The Myconid Sovereign explains that it can infuse the characters with rapport spores and neutralize servitor spores, enabling them to blend in with the fungal servitors accompanying Zuggtomy. The characters then have a few hours to make their way to the center of Araumycos' territory, where Zuggtomy's ritual is set to take place. When they are sufficiently close to the epicenter of the ritual, the characters will be able to enter rapport with Araumycos. Basidia's rapport spores help facilitate the process, but Araumycos' sleeping mind isn't in full control of the defenses of its body and might interpret the character's presence as an attack. Basidia warns the characters that they must be on their guard for a reaction from the vast fungus. Once the characters have entered rapport, they must seek out Araumycos' sleeping mind, Araumycos' sleeping mind, Araumycos'? Yeah, whatever, anyway, and awaken it to the danger it faces. Basidia doesn't know if Zuggtomy will become aware of what the characters are doing, but if she does, they will have only a limited amount of time before the Demon Queen tries to stop them. So once Basidia has explained his plan, then read this. It says, even as the Myconid Sovereign's thoughts fill your mind, you become aware of a faint hissing and fizzing sound. The fungus around you dissolves to a formless goo as something moves in the undergrowth to surround you. So what's happening here is a pair of regenerating black puddings, which are spies for Juiblex, have slithered through the undergrowth to attack the party. So basically, the Myconids fall back, and they want to protect Sovereign Basidia, and they plead with the adventurers for their help. So by the book, it says, empowered by Juiblex, these regenerating black puddings have an intelligence of 6, which is a higher intelligence than normal, and the following feature, which is regeneration, and it increases each pudding's challenge rating to 5. So they have a regeneration here. The pudding regains 10 hit points at the start of its turn. If the pudding takes fire damage, this trait doesn't function at the start of the pudding's next turn, and the pudding dies only if it starts its turn with 0 hit points and doesn't regenerate. So, kind of like a troll or something like that. It's basically regenerates. Now, what I did to make this even more challenging to the players is, in addition to the black puddings regenerating, I also gave them a psychic crush. Now, if you look in oozes and puddings and all that in the Monster Manual, there's a psychic gray ooze variant that has a psychic crush. And what I did is I gave them a psychic crush, but I bumped it up in these black puddings to DC 15 and 6d6 worth of damage. So sharp-eyed viewers will suddenly notice I'm in a different shirt. I lost about the final 15 or 20 minutes of recording because just for some reason my video editing software just said I don't want to record that clip that you just spent so much time recording. So didn't have a chance to get back to it until the next night. So there you go. Mystery solved. Anyway, we had left off where I had added Psychic Crush to the black puddings that were already given generation basically or regeneration by Juiblex. So with that and the psychic crush that I gave them, which again was nastier than the gray ooze psychic crush. I made it, I think, DC 15 and 6d6 damage, so I made it nastier. And so with all of that, the black puddings actually gave the party a decent fight. I mean, there was no chance the party was going to lose, but it gave them a decent fight. And then I bumped. It had already said take the black puddings to CR5 because of the regeneration, and then I took them to CR6 because of the adding that enhanced psychic crush. So did that, and it was a good fight. And the monk, it was also good to do just to provide a challenge to the monk character. There's a tabaxi monk, or is it a tabaxi? No, not a tabaxi. It's a tiefling monk, but it's this sort of feline type of tiefling thing. And that player and that character are the strongest as far as fighting on the team, and sometimes it's difficult to challenge them. So so that the psychic stuff that's just a saving throw where you take damage, can be a good example of if you have a character who's really, really, really strong in melee. And often, encounters that you thought were going to be more challenging end up not becoming so challenging because of that one character or a couple of characters. Try adding some different types of situations in with the encounters to kind of give them a little bit more of a challenge. And that is exactly what happened. Not a fatal or even near fatal challenge, but just made it more of a challenge and more like, whoa, they're actually kind of whooping on me here. So. Anyway, moving on. So after they defeat the puddings, basically Sovereign Basidia and the Myconids will then go on to, do the even more rapport spores and also the spore servants. They give them sort of an inoculation against becoming a spore servant for a few hours. So that way the party can safely join the wedding procession of all the creepy fungal Myconid, awakened Zerkwoods and spore servants cavorting and dancing and all that, and not be like, they can just kind of go along with the flow. And one thing that the party did though, because that black pudding fight was a little bit of a challenge, so they took a short rest, which kind of freaked Basidia out because he's like, whoa, time is of the essence. But I didn't say no, don't take a short rest. Now, what I did not tell the players, but if they had said, well, we're going to take a long rest, then what would have happened is that Zuggtomy and Juiblex and Araumycos and all that stuff would have, unfolded, and everything would have happened without the players being involved. So more than likely, I would have Zuggtomy, would be bonding with Araumycos, and more than likely I would have Juiblex take Zuggtomy out and then eat Araumycos if I was just going to do it with my own narrative without, doing a dice simulated battle between two demon lords and all that stuff. But they took a short rest, so it's fine. But yeah, I really wanted to, and the book kind of makes this point too. It's about to happen. I mean, this is about to happen. This is a big, critical, dangerous thing that is about to happen. Zuggtomy wants to bond with Araumycos and get its power, or Juiblex, basically wants to take Zuggtomy out and eat Araumycos, because wow, what a feast. Either way, not good to lose Araumycos, and definitely not good to have Zuggtomy bond with Araumycos and get that power. But anyway, so the party goes ahead and they get the rapport spores and all of that, and off they go into the wedding procession. and you know, all the creepy cavorting and all that. And one of the things that we talked about was that, you know, they did not say we're not taking the expedition. So I said, so the expedition's there, right? And everyone, and you know, the players were like, yep, because they didn't say they were leaving the expedition behind. And I said, you know, the Myconids have enough rapport spores and all that stuff for the expedition. Because it doesn't explicitly say in the chapter, you know, don't bring the expedition, or if it does say that, I don't remember reading that. And I kind of read through this chapter pretty close a couple of times. So, you know, they took everybody, which is fine. I don't mind. And in fact, we had a little bit of fun with it, because I said, you know, this rapport, all these rapport spores and this rapport that's being established among the party and the expedition and everything, you know, you're kind of on a very low level kind of telepathy with everybody. You know, not to where you can, you know, read each other's thoughts or send each other thoughts, but you know, you kind of get sensations and almost kind of like an empathy, or have empathic, you know, senses of, and you kind of know where everybody is, and that kind of thing, including the riding lizards, and the flying snake. So that was kind of fun. You know, nice little detail. Now next session, which has already happened, but I won't recap tonight. You know, that they try to go a little bit too far with it and make it like, you know, like, I don't know if you know, the X-Men will have like a telepathic bond, and they can just communicate telepathically, like they have built-in communicators or something. And the Justice League does it sometimes too, like if Martian Manhunter's part of the team. And that it's not, I didn't make it that strong. And the book doesn't go there with it. I just did. I thought it'd be kind of fun. And, you know, we just had fun with it. But again, let me remind you that unless like if the party's in a fight or trying to solve an encounter or challenge, unless they specifically include the expedition, I don't have the expedition take an active part in the encounters. I assume the expedition is taking care of minor stuff along the way. And then if, you know, if the party's in a fight, it's just the party. Unless they say, I want Eldith's help, or I want the expedition's help, or I want whatever. And then if they do that, then yeah, they get the help and that's fine, but there's also less XP and less loot that gets shared. So, and you know, I've mentioned that before, but thought it was worth mentioning again because I haven't talked about that in a while. So, as they're, you know, in this procession, I decided to have a little fun and bring yet another old character back, that had been part of the campaign previously. And this character has been asked about a few times. I don't know, you know, if you've been with the video series, you know, the whole time, you may remember when they were in Neverlight Grove, there's that big, huge mushroom tower, that Zuggtomy has kind of turned into her base, her tower, and she's in there. And this is in, I think, even part one. This is in part one of Out of the Abyss before they leave and come back. So they're in Neverlight Grove, and you know, with my players, a couple of them had gone all the way to the Mushroom Tower, and one of them, and I think I was even like, you know, I had this slow motion thing where I was like, she attacked Zuggtomy, you know, where the player had this crazy idea, is kind of a nice way of putting it, and went in and decided to start a mob war, you know, like a mafia boss war among the demon lords, and went in and said, Demogorgon sends his regards, and like flamed Zuggtomy, you know, while she's getting fitted for her wedding dress in a, you know, creepy kind of way. Especially Zuggtomy, but the demon lords in general, that it is just creepy and weird. You know, this sort of blasphemous, you know, shattered mirror, cracked mirror version of a marriage and all this. But anyway, and so there were two player characters there at that moment, and one of them said, I'm out of here, wisely, and split. and the one that had said, Demogorgon sends his regards, and like flamed the player, or flamed Zuggtomy, and I think burned her wedding dress. And it says right in the book, in that chapter, like, if you damage the wedding dress, then Zuggtomy is like, what, and will retaliate. And so that player was like trying to run out too and got knocked unconscious. And from that point forward, they've never known the fate of that character. And they ask every now and then. The character's name was Anna. And I, when it happened, I said, oh, let me see that character sheet. And the player handed over, and I went, all right, thanks. And I tucked it in the book and left. And, I tucked it in the book and didn't give it back. And they were like, whoa. And I just thought that was a nice, if they would have asked for it back, I would have given it back to them. But, they never made an issue out of it. And so it's always been kind of up in the air, because they know that, well, she wasn't technically dead. She got knocked unconscious. And then, Zuggtomy's there. So Zuggtomy can either kill her or turn her into a servant or whatever. And that's what happened. I knew one of these days I would bring Anna back in. I didn't know how, but this was the perfect time. So they're in the wedding procession. Everybody's cavorting and celebrating in that sort of bizarre mockery, the Myconids and all this stuff. And they see la 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 next to them, kind of cavorting and shuffling and, whatever, like a spore servant zombie, is Anna. And some of the player characters recognized her, some didn't. One of the characters that did recognize her was Mara, the paladin, who now part of the expedition. Well, it had been established that Mara and Anna were friends in some fashion, because the same player played both of them. And so when Mara, the paladin, the newly boom, I'm back paladin, saw Anna, she's like, oh, and started, heading that way. Which, I remember I'm playing Mara as an NPC at this point. And Mara's like basically, wanting to take out, probably what I would have had, like, she realizes that it's a blasphemous mockery of life, these spores growing out in the body and controlling it and all that, or whatever, and would probably try to kill the creature that Anna has become, out of respect for her friend, so that this mockery isn't walking around. But the Order of the Gauntlet, the honor guard, was like, whoa, kind of trying to restrain her. And what I did, and I don't know why I did it this way. Sometimes it's, because in retrospect, I'm like, why didn't I make that just a normal saving throw? But I said, I was talking to the player that used to play her, and the player that used to play her, and said, how much wisdom did Mara have? And he was like 8. So I said, okay. I said, I'm going to let you roll it. I said, you need to roll an 8 or under in order for her to resist the urge to go do this. Remember, they're surrounded by enemies, potential enemies. And he rolled an 8. Boom. So I was like, she barely manages to, make the wise choice. And so that was interesting. That was kind of an interesting moment. And then the other thing that happened was I decided that was a good moment to call for a madness saving throw, because we hadn't done that in a while. And, they're surrounded by all this creepy craziness in the Underdark. And then also some of the players are seeing an old friend, an old ally in this disturbing situation. So I called for a madness check, saving throw. I just made it like DC 10. And everybody passed it except one player character. And then that player character, I had already had one madness in the past. So that put them at madness level 2, which meant it was a long-term madness. So I just rolled on the regular madness chart. Thinking about it, I probably should have rolled on Zuggtomy's madness, because this is all Zuggtomy related stuff. But I just rolled on the regular madness chart, and that ended up being it was an effect where you have revulsion for an object, usually whatever provoked the madness, like the antipathy part of the antipathy/sympathy spell. And that, in a nutshell, basically says that you you do a saving throw. If you see the object that you have antipathy towards, and in this case they have revulsion against something like that spell, then you have to, if you're within 60 feet of that object of revulsion, or if you can see it, then you have to make a saving throw. And if you fail it, then it's like you're under the fear spell, like you're frightened and want to get away from it until either A, you can't see it, or B, you're outside of 60 feet. So the way I interpret that is, even if you can't see it, if you're within 60 feet, then you still experience that revulsion. And if you see it, even if it's 300 feet away, if you see it, you have the revulsion. That's kind of how I'm interpreting that. Open to your thoughts, if somebody else has a different way of doing it. So, and that also ties back when I was talking earlier in the video about, the player was like, well, it was asking me, do we just get rid of this with lesser restoration because it's an 8th level spell, and and that's, I was like, it's a spell, it's a madness that has an effect like that spell. It's not the spell itself. And so that's where that came into it. Anyway, so they began freaking out after they failed a saving throw. And this was also, I didn't know what to set. Like I'd welcome your comments on this, because the madness says, they come under this effect like the antipathy or / sympathy spell. And it's under the long-term madness in the Dungeon Master's Guide on that table. It's like the 3rd or 4th result. And the spell itself calls for a saving throw if they're exposed to whatever the object is. And I'm like, okay, that's a spell, but does the madness just mean it's automatically in effect? But in the middle of the game, I wasn't even really thinking that way. I just said, well, give me a saving throw. But then later I was like, well, maybe if it's madness, it should just be automatic. But anyway, I said, give me a saving throw. And then I didn't know, what DC do I make it? Because if it's the spell, then that's an 8th level spell. It's probably going to have a pretty high DC based on the level of a spellcaster that can cast an 8th level spell. If it's madness, I don't know. What do I say? So just on the moment, I said, well, just make it DC 15. And, and it's, that's a good rule of thumb, just like advantage, disadvantage, like, well, I know they should have a bonus here, but I don't know what it is. Or I know they should have a negative here. I don't really have time to calculate it. Just give them advantage or disadvantage. Keep the game moving. Alternately, for saving throws, a really easy way to do saving throws, if you need to do it quickly, is if it's something they could possibly fail but not likely, set it at 5. If it's average, they may pass, they may fail, whatever, but it's average, give it a 10. If it's hard but not impossible, give it a 15. And if it's like only in certain circumstances should they make this, make it 20. And then that way, that's a really easy way to, just pop a DC and keep going. And so that's what it is, say DC 15. The character failed the saving throw, at which point they came under the effects of the revulsion, which means they were frightened of the Anna thing. And this was a great ending, a great cliffhanger. The character is beginning to freak out and, about to bolt and freaking in a way that is starting to kind of attract attention. So even though they have the rapport spores on them and all that stuff, and they're kind of, infiltrating the enemy's camp or whatever you want to call it, classic trope from 8 million movies and books and all that, they're still, it's like starting to attract a little bit of attention. And that's exactly where we ended it. Now, that wasn't where I had intended to end the session. I had intended to end it a little further on with an Otiug, or a faux Otiug battle that leads into the encounter with Araumycos. But this was so much better. It was this nice emergent thing that happened, and it's a great cliffhanger to end on, that one of your players is freaking out, and they're in the midst of hundreds, if not thousands, of potential enemies, and some of them are starting to look over at them like, what's going on over there? So that was a great way to end it. Now I know how it resolved because I've already had that session, but you'll have to wait till next video to see how it all resolved and the fun that we had resolving it. So anyway, that's it for this this video. Thanks so much for watching, and you know, appreciate everybody who watches these videos, gives feedback and all that. You know, I continue to get positive, not just on the most recent videos, but I still get comments on, you know, videos I made a year or 2 years ago, and they're like, man, this stuff is so helpful. So I'm glad it's helpful. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and we'll catch you next time on Shane Plays.